Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I join many of my colleagues in encouraging the Senate to continue working on solutions to protect our planet from the growing threats from climate change. First, I would like to thank Senator Sheldon Whitehouse for his leadership and tireless work on these issues. We both represent the great state of Rhode Island, the ocean state, and I'm lucky to have such a strong partner to work with to improve the health of our oceans, fight sea level rise, beach erosion, ocean warming, and acidification. I'm proud to work alongside him as we respond to the serious challenges of climate change. Indeed, he is the leader in this effort in this Senate and throughout my state and throughout this country. And I applaud his commitment to this endeavor and his efforts to organize us all to come here and to speak. We are already shouldering the cost of climate change to Americans, and these costs are increasing. Climate change is driving severe drought and wildfires in the West, larger and more frequent floods in the Midwest, and sea level rise, and greater storm damage along our coast. Vulnerable populations like children with asthma and the elderly are suffering from higher levels of smog in our cities and longer, more severe heat waves. Farmers and ranchers are struggling with crop and livestock losses from drought. Increasingly, acidic oceans are harming shellfish populations and threatening fisheries. Communities are struggling to pay for infrastructure damaged by fires, more extreme storms, and coastal erosion. And in the face of this evidence, as my colleagues have all pointed out, there is a systematic and organized effort to discredit it, dismiss it, ignore it. But Americans are sensing dramatically the effects in their own lives, and they understand this. One area, though, that I think is important to emphasize is that climate change is just not a local issue or an issue that is associated with domestic policy. It has profound national security ramifications. Indeed, to the military, climate change acts as a threat multiplier, exacerbating threats in already unstable regions of the world. Climate change creates choke points for oil distribution lines and exacerbates our dependence on foreign oil to fuel our ships, tanks, aircraft, and tactical vehicles. To protect our national security, we must take action based on the scientific evidence presented by our nation's best climate scientists. Such experts have overwhelmingly warned us that the increasingly warmer temperatures will mean oppressive heat in already hot areas. And this translates not only into geopolitical issues, but it translates down to the individual soldier. For our infantry personnel, this means carrying several pounds of additional gear across dry and arid regions. And supplying these troops with fuel and water is becoming a difficult challenge for our military leaders. Warmer temperatures also lead to glacial melts, causing sea level rise and ocean acidification, affecting our seafaring vessels and our aircraft carriers, and increasing the complexity of our Navy. One of the more interesting moments I had on the Armed Services Committee was to listen several years ago to an admiral describe to me about transit to the Arctic Ocean will become commonplace in just a few years. And to someone who was brought up in the 50s and 60s and served in the military in the 70s, that seemed completely implausible, but that's happening. But yet there are groups who are organized that are making that try to disappear. Well, it's not disappearing for our military. They have to cope with it, plan for it, and indeed ensure that our security is protected from the ramifications. In national security, decisions are made by a careful examination of risk. And given the preponderance of scientific evidence, it only makes sense that we address the major risks caused by climate change. National security and foreign policy leaders across the political spectrum issued a statement last year urging the highest levels of American government and business to take domestic and international action to fight climate change. These are the national security experts. They are our bipartisan group of Americans who have dedicated their lives to this nation. They are not a self-interested group of people that are profiting from a certain position. They include former Secretaries of Defense Chuck Hagel and Bill Cohen and Leon Panetta, former Secretaries of State Madeleine Albright and Joel Schultz, National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski and Robert Bud McFarlane, Senators, our former colleagues Olympia Snowe and Carl Levin and Richard Lugar, New Jersey Governor and Chair of the 9/11 Commission, Thomas Keane, and retired U.S. Army Chief of Staff, General Gordon R. Sullivan. These and many others all agree that climate change is a threat to national security. and have called for U.S. leadership in the global effort to tackle the urgent and complex problems of climate change. But yet, even these wise and selfless Americans are being dismissed, if you will, by the organized effort to undercut scientific evidence. Now, we took steps and have taken steps. Just last December in Paris, we took a step forward with an international agreement. More than 150 countries pledged to develop plans to tackle climate change domestically, including countries once reluctant to act, like China and India. American leadership has been key to getting these countries on board and agreeing to do their fair share. These countries are also acting because it's in their self-interest to do so, for their own health and for their national security. It's clear that no country can avoid the impacts of climate change, and no country can meet this challenge alone. As a nation that has contributed more than a quarter of all global carbon pollution, it is our responsibility to lead, not to deny. As a nation already feeling the effects and cost of climate change, it is also in our national interest to do so. As we have seen time and time again, other countries will join us if America leads the way, not by denial, but by dedication to pragmatic solutions that can be achieved. American companies must also do a better job in addressing climate change. It's not enough just for America's government and military to take action. The private sector also needs to step up to the plate. Companies need to be transparent and provide full disclosure of the impacts that their industries have on our climate, our environment, and they must take full responsibility for their actions. Some companies have improved their sustainability practices and have made strides to inform consumers about their carbon footprint, and more need to join them. In fact, many companies have concluded it's in their economic self-interest to do so, not just in the national or public interest to do so. Information about the risk posed by climate change is also something that's critical to investors, and some of whom are demanding greater disclosures. For example, Allianz Global Investors, which is a global diversified active investment manager with nearly $500 billion in assets under management, has specifically called for achieving better disclosure of the effects of carbon costs on the oil and gas companies. And I've indeed introduced legislation to enhance climate-related disclosures by publicly held companies to ensure that these companies are providing investors with the information necessary to make informed investment decisions. These companies not only owe an obligation, as we all do, to the greater welfare of the country and indeed the world, but they owe a very direct and indeed fiduciary obligation to their investors. And many of these companies have information, I would suspect at least, that should in fact be disclosed. And we have to ensure that they do this so that the market operates appropriately. So it's not just about broad statements of protecting the climate. It's not just about feeling good. It's about making concrete information available to the public, to investors, to the country as a whole, not to deny, obfuscate, or ignore this information. So I urge my colleagues to support legislation that protects our air, water, natural resource environment. The health of our oceans and environment must be preserved for now and for future generations. And indeed, in this effort, I can think of no one who's taking a more forceful and constructive role than my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, and again, I salute him.